Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I work here at the Education Department at the Aquarium of the Pacific down here in Long Beach, California. We're going to be talking today about jellies and plankton. So, we're going to have a lot of fun information. If you haven't watched one of our programs before, you get to participate during our classes today. Now, my friend Cynthia is helping out control what's going to be seen behind us here, and Jen's on a question control. So if you have questions you'd like answered about jellies and plankton, reach out to us. Text us at 562-286-1838. Remember that text rates do apply. If you're one of our younger viewers, make sure you have the permission of an adult around you to help make sure that you can text in those questions. If it's not been, or if you're not watching live and it's been a little while since this aired, you can email us too. There's an email underneath the phone number, live@lbaop.org. So if you're not watching live, or if your questions don't get answered as completely as you might want, go ahead and use the email, and we can have our educators help fulfill more of your questions. But Jen's going to be writing down some of the ones that you text into us and bringing them into the studio. All right, so jellies and plankton. Let's talk about jellies a little bit because they are plankton. We'll get into that. But let's look at a jelly and talk more about the characteristics of jellies. So Cynthia's going to put up a pretty generic jelly for us. If you've been to the Aquarium of the Pacific before, you might recognize these jellies. These are moon jellies. And when you look at them, it looks like the moon. Great observation. So their pale coloring, or almost no color, is kind of what gives them that name. Well, what kind of things do we observe or notice about our jellies? We're all scientists watching, participating today. We're going to make observations, we're going to ask questions, and we're going to come to a conclusion about things. So what do we notice about the jellies? I see these four little circles on there. Did you see those too? Let's see if we can figure out what the four little circles are. Okay, what else do we see? They got some fluffy parts right here. They got little hairy ones. Look like little hair sticking off of them. Do we know all the parts of a jelly? Well, let's see if we can name them. I have a model jelly right here. Doesn't always sit in the same spot. It floats around. You'll get that joke later. All right, so jellies have a couple different body parts. What can we call these body parts? We can come up with different names on our own, but what scientists already named some of them are, the body right here is the bell. Have you ever held up like a bell that you could ring? It's kind of what it looks like, especially on some of the bigger jellies. Not quite as flat and pancakey as these are. So the bell is this big main body part right here. Now on the top, on our moon jellies, you can see the four circles. What part inside the body do you think a jelly would have? Do they have brains? No, no brains. Do they have eyes? Not like we do. They have eye spots. They can see bright or dark, but not really objects in front of them. At least the true jellies, that's how it works. No brains. Do they have a heart? No, I don't see any blood. So they don't need a heart. They don't need a brain. What else could there be? Man, I'm still full from lunch. Maybe they have stomachs. Yeah, these four circles are their stomachs. And underneath the stomachs are their reproductive organs. So there's male and female jellies like this. Their stomachs are right there. And you can even see the food that these moon jellies had captured in the water. So these little dots that are on their tentacles are what they're going to be eating. They're eating other plankton. What? Plankton eating plankton? That's actually quite common. What else do you notice about the jellies? So we talked about the two different tentacle parts. So the skinny little ones, those are the stinging tentacles. So you notice where these food particles are attached? These really skinny hair-like tentacles? Those are the stinging ones. And they use specialized cells called nematocysts. Then that's a part in the cnidocyte. So the cnidocyte is the whole structure that has this little harpoon that it can fire at its food. And what happens is, if you imagine, you can actually do this at home. You can practice with this. Hold your hand up in a little closed fist, stick your thumb up like you're like, hey! And inside would be a little harpoon. And when something touches the trigger, what would be your thumb, the little harpoon flies out. And it will launch into its prey. And it doesn't really choose what it stings. It just stings whatever touches these tentacles. And then these fluffy ones, these are called the oral arms or feeding arms. They grab the food from a stinging tentacle. So all this food that's on the stinging tentacles right here is going to get picked up by the big fluffy tentacles, the oral arms, and it's going to get put into their mouth underneath. So that's the basic body of a jelly. So we know their parts, we know what they're doing in their environment, we know they have to move around to find food. But how are they moving around? Are they swimming like a fish? Nah. We were watching Moving and Grooving early today with Sarah. She showed you how some of the animals move. Jellies aren't swimmers or crawlers or jumpers. They're drifters. The lazy river, la la la, all through the water, just very calm. I want to be a jelly if I were swimming. Since I can't swim very fast, that is actually how I go in the water. But that's neither here nor there. So jellies just bloop, bloop, drift a little bit. They don't move a whole lot, except where the water pushes them. So if there's a current in here that was pushing this jelly this way, it really couldn't fight the current and go back the other way. It'll try, but unless that current is slower than the jelly's ability to move and pulse with the bell, it's going to go wherever the water pushes them. So plankton are the drifters of the ocean. They go where the water pushes them. They can swim some, but not enough to really go wherever they want to. The swimmers of the ocean are called nekton. So these are plankton. They are drifting around. One of them is a plankter. Now, Jen's on question control. She's going to correct me if I say anything about plankton wrong. She's our plankton guru. Well, plankton or algae in general? Plankton or algae? Which one are you better at? She's better at algae. Well, guess what? These are all algae too, so it's still in Jen's wheelhouse. These are phytoplankton. Now, there's a couple different ways we can divide plankton out. It's sometimes their life history, how they start, how they end into their adulthood. In other ways, there's how they gather resources, meaning collect energy or produce energy. These produce energy on their own. These are phytoplankton, like photosynthesis. They do what the plants do. Now, the cool thing about phytoplankton is that they make over 50 or maybe almost 70% of the oxygen in the air. But they're in the water, you say. How does it get up in the air? It's called evaporation. The oxygen will evaporate out of the water, and it will get into the air, and that's how we breathe it. Now, the plants do this on their own. They release it from their leaves or the parts of their bodies that do photosynthesis. But in the body of a phytoplankton, it's just diffused and released out into the water, and then it can diffuse up into the air or evaporate up into the air. So oxygen, most of the oxygen on the planet is from them. We think of it as the plant's job to make all the oxygen. It's really the plankton. Well, thank you, plankton. I do enjoy oxygen. You're welcome. All right, so that's one kind of plankton. The other kind are the zooplankton. So remember, we have phytoplankton. They make their own energy like plants do. Zooplankton have to eat to get energy like the animals do. So they're literally called plant-like plankton and animal-like plankton. So the zooplankton are going to be eating the phytoplankton. So the next bigger plankton eats the smaller one, and that's how the energy moves. So if you watch any of our food web or ecosystem discussions, we talk about that too. So these are all different kinds of plankton. They're all different floaters or drifters in the ocean, and they have a little bit different jobs. Now we have a couple questions coming in. I think we might have a webcam of jellies available. Cynthia can try and bring it up. I'm not sure what the status of the webcam is. We've been doing a little bit of remodeling, and exhibit maintenance. So sometimes the webcams are not always working perfectly. But we'll see if we can get a jelly webcam going for you. Now, while Jen's writing down some questions, let's think about how the jellies fit into the idea of plankton. Remember, they don't swim where they want to. They're drifters. They move in the ocean where the ocean pushes them. They eat other things. Can they chase their food? We said they go a little bit. But can they really chase? If they wanted a fish, could they really chase a fish down? Not really. Plankton have it tough. The jellies, if they need to eat, have to wait to run into their food. That would be so difficult if you eat the big stuff. If you're like the moon jellies, they eat really small plankton, which lives kind of everywhere in the ocean. So they would run into stuff all the time. But if you're a bigger jelly, like these Pacific nettles, you might not run into the food as easily. Now let's imagine, let's pretend we're jellies. Lazy river, la la, that's how I like to swim. But now, I'm hungry, I need to find food. I have to wait until I run into my food. My food's just out of reach, I probably can't get it. That'd be like the weirdest cafeteria setup where if you have to generally bump into food to get to eat it, but if you don't bump into food, well, no, none for you. that's how jellies kind of operate. They have to float around into an area to get to their food. Now, a good question came in is, why are plankton spiky? Well, what are spikes good for? Jen says jabbing. Yeah, I mean, that's not wrong. If you are like a porcupine-like animal, you could jab things with your spikes. But what if you're a plankton and it's not like you're just like jabbing or chopping? You're just pokey. Well, that can prevent some things from trying to eat you. Make it tough for them to eat you. Think of an urchin. Sea urchins, when they're adults, are big, spiky balls. Makes it tough for stuff to grab onto them and eat them. So the plankton here, some of that is for motility or movement. Some of that is for protection. And some of that is just the design of their bodies. Some of my favorite plankton are called the radiolarians. Oh, they're so pretty. They have little glass shells. Yeah, they're shells. These parts here are made of glass on the outside of some of them, not these specifically. But the radiolarians are very pretty, and it's made of glass. And those spikes sometimes help them float, sometimes help them move around, but it also can help protect them in some cases too. So in movement for the little tiny microplankton, these little things, they have two ways to move. One is called cilia, which are tiny little hairs. So imagine you were a microplankton. You needed to swim, but you can't swim very far. There's two ways to do it. One is tiny little hairs that help brush the water along and you can swim. One is with these big tails called flagella that just kind of do one of these things. They're very strange structures to us because we have legs and arms. It looks like it wouldn't work right. But flagella and cilia are how things will move in the ocean. Now, I can draw you a little example. Actually, I do have a little whiteboard right here. Hold on. Ta-da! All right. So we kind of got to my favorite plankton is the radiolarians. I don't know. Jen, do you remember if radiolarians are phytoplankton or are they zooplankton? Jen says they're in between. Can't make a commitment. I'm okay with that. They like to work in every way possible. Well, you know, versatility is really good. So kudos to radiolarians. All right, so here's a little plankton with these tiny little hairs around them, and then they undulate or flap really fast in a wave, and that's how they swim. There's these other ones that have what looks like a tail, or some of them actually have two flagella, two tails. One goes around the middle, and one goes around the top. And they can swim by spinning them around, kind of like a propeller on a boat or an airplane. So they can swim because of these different body parts that they've attached to their bodies, cilia and flagella. All right, is salp a jelly? Not as far as I know. I don't think they belong in the same group, but they are a squishy invertebrate animal that are often see-through. Now, salps are very special. They only show up on our beaches every once in a while. So if you do ever find a salp, they're pretty cool to look at. But in general, if we're out at the ocean, like Sarah was talking about at tide pools, we want to leave nature be nature, so we don't really want to pick anybody up, move anybody around. And we got to be careful, too, because we want to make sure that the animals are safe. We have to make sure we're safe, too. So if you ever see a salp, cool, take a picture of it. You can even type it into things like iNaturalist and ask people, what's this thing? And they'll help figure it out for you. So that's one of the really cool things is that if you find an animal in the ocean, you're not sure who it is, or on a hike in the forest, you can ask other people and they can help identify those things for you. All right, let's get back to doing more stuff on jellies. Now, the life cycle of a jelly is pretty cool. Jellies have a little bit different way to have babies. Now, Jen's fixing some questions up, so let's draw our bell. I always add sound effects when I draw. Here's their oral arms, okay? So here's our adult jelly. Well, they're going to release either a sperm or an egg, and when those meet, they make the embryo. Well, this is going to land on something, and it's going to grow into a little tiny thing that looks almost like an anemone, like these. It grows up to a point where it's going to clone itself, and they'll pop off into little clones of themselves. So this way, they had sexual reproduction. There was a male and female, made an embryo. This way, they clone themselves, and they bud, and the little ones, now these are actually really tiny. This is not life size. If we were right next to the exhibit where this is at, They're really, really small. So this is a strobila, or strobila, I think, as Jen would say. I say strobila because that's how I was taught, so that's how I did it. But these little tentacles do the same job. What do the tentacles do in an adult jelly? Well, wait a minute. These are adults too. What? Yes, this is an adult phase. They have two different adult phases and two different juvenile or little kid phases. So an adult moon jelly has the same job on its tentacles as these little tentacles do, collecting their food. Now, these don't even drift around. These are on a surface, so they have to wait for food to come to them. They can't even just partially drift into their food. They have to wait for the food to come to them. Now, you notice these layers right here, these are going to become baby jellies that bud or pop off and grow into this little tiny thing that looks like it has, I don't know how many arms, a few. Almost looks like a star. But it's a baby jelly. And when the baby jelly grows in that circle and looks like the adult, it's back to its jelly phase that we recognize. Now, there's some really cool exhibits and videos and pictures of the entire life cycle of jellies. They are very complex organisms for our not having brains, not having hearts, not having blood, only having stomachs and mouths and tentacles. They're very simple compared to the complex structures we have in our bodies, but they have a very complex life, and there's a lot of really cool information about the jellies. All right, so jellies have an interesting life cycle. They drift around, they catch their food. They have tentacles for stinging and tentacles for eating. What else do we need to know about jellies? A common question we get is that why do we call them sea jellies instead of jellyfish? Well, are they fish? Doesn't swim like a fish. I don't see any fish parts on them. We might call them fish. Actually, historically, when people would name things in the ocean, fish just kind of meant an ocean or water animal. So fish kind of got tagged onto a lot of names of animals that are not actually fish. And that's okay. We understand what you mean when you say jellyfish. But we're scientists together here right now, so we're going to be as accurate as we can, as scientists should. So we're going to call them sea jellies. That's the same rule with starfish. They're not really a fish either, but we call them sea stars when we're talking about the sciencey stuff. So a sea jelly, how does it breathe? We talked about feeding, movement a little bit. How does it breathe? Where is it getting the oxygen that all that phytoplankton we're making? We have lungs. We can breathe through our lungs. What do fish have? Gills. They have gills. Do you see any gills on these jellies right here? I see a whole bunch of other lines and things in their body, but I don't really see any gills. Do you? No? No gills. So they have to be getting oxygen from somewhere. They get it in their skin. Their bodies are so delicate and simple, but so well adapted, they can exchange oxygen, or what we do, like we breathe in and out, they can get it through their skin. And they release the carbon dioxide, like we exhale carbon dioxide. They will just release it through their skin. So they don't need all the other complex systems that we have, because they can do a lot of it through their skin. Now their mouth and their stomachs will digest as much as they can, and when they're done, they spit it back out. So they only have one way in and one way out, and it's the same spot. So they go to the bathroom where they eat. Oh, but that's how jellies do. All right. Actually, a lot of people have been asking, how many kinds of jellies are there? Now, whenever you look up the number of species of a thing, that can be a tough answer to find, because in science, we're always discovering and learning something new, and it's always tougher if you haven't read every jelly species on a list and you've counted them. And in some cases, we removed some from the list because these two are actually the same one. We just didn't realize that at the time. Or, hey, this one is actually 3 different kinds. So the numbers change a lot. But the estimation right now is a little over 2,000 types of different sea jellies. Is that true jellies, or is that jellies and relatives? Jellies and relatives. So, all right, there's relatives of jellies? Why, yes, there are. The jellies that we see right here, like crystal jellies, the moon jellies, the nettles, they're what we call the true jellies. A true jelly? What's a fake jelly? Think of a man of war. Have you heard of the Portuguese man of war? That's a jelly relative. So the jelly relatives are very jelly-like, very similar to the jellies, but they're a little bit different. Siphonophores are also cousins to jellies. Siphonophores are one of my favorite deep sea animals. They are very beautiful, very different looking from what we think of as an animal should look. I mean, okay, we recognize that's a jelly. We've seen them in cartoons and movies and TV and books. I recognize that's an animal, but siphonophores are even more different and more beautiful in my opinion. You don't have to have the same opinion, and that's okay. So I love the siphonophores. They're also cousins to jellies. There's one that we get here every once in a rare while called a by-the-wind sailor. They get the biggest common name that I think I've ever seen of any animal. Velella velella, V-E-L-L-E-L-A. So the velella are a little jelly-like animal. Now imagine the jelly's upright, and it's got a fan sail on top, just like a sailboat, tentacles hanging in the water. It's a type of jelly, and the wind literally pushes them around, which is why they got nicknamed the by-the-wind sailors, because they show up, they only hang out on the surface, they drift, and their tentacles grab their food, and they just move where the wind pushes them. So they're not even as much of a swimmer as the regular jellies. They just float along. Where do jellies go when they die? That is a good question, because we're always thinking about what happens to things in their lifetime. We compare a lot of things to ourselves. What happens to us compared to them? How do we breathe? How do they breathe? How do we eat? How does that thing eat? Well, what happens to jellies when they pass away? Well, what happens with a lot of things when any animal dies is that if they're not eaten by another thing in the process, they're decaying or they're breaking down. But in that case, a lot of things eat that too, the scavengers. Think of animals that scavenge on an animal that's already died, not one that they killed or preyed upon, one that's just already sitting there and is not alive, and they eat the leftovers. Scavengers or detritivores will clean up the decaying leftover stuff from all the other animals. So there's a lot of detritivores that will pick up dead jellies or animals that will find them and eat them. But their bodies are very simple. They do start to break down. They're very delicate, so a lot of wave action for jellies on the surface, they'll break apart, which is one thing that does happen. And so a lot of animals end up what we call marine snow. If you've never seen marine snow, any video you've seen of underwater footage where it looks like, oh, the snow is coming down, that's leftover parts of food of everybody else. Either like the crumbs that fly off after they're eating or waste that they've excreted out of their backside. So that's marine snow. A little bit different image of snow than you have in your mind now. So some jellies are going to break down into that, and some jellies are eaten. Jellies are actually a common food for sea turtles. We had a very special sea turtle video that we used for World Ocean Day yesterday from one of our turtles feeding. Now, we don't give our turtle jellies. That's okay. We do give them other things. So sea turtles love to eat jellies. They have these special little finger things in their throat called papillae who help prevent their food from getting out. Now, turtles even have this other adaptation. They will whole mouth swallow their food on a lot of water too. But they don't want to swallow all that water that they just sucked in. They have to spit all that water out. So the papillae that's in their throat that keep their food down also allows them to spit all the water out and keep the food in. So all those little fingers hold onto their food and allow them to swallow it while they spit a whole lot of water out. So jellies do end up the food of turtles and a few other animals like mola molas, the ocean sunfish, quite often. Is poop marine snow brown? Maybe? Kinda. It's usually not. Actually, it kind of is every color because krill are kind of a pinkish red color, and when whales go to the bathroom, their poo is very pinkish red. So marine snow is every color of the rainbow, I think. Maybe not blue or green. Maybe green because there's a lot of algae in the ocean, and algae can be green. Algae can be brownish colored. So maybe marine snow can be brown. That's actually the first time I've ever been asked that. Whoever asked that, awesome question. I love it. It's really not a day in education if we don't talk about poop in some way because scientists really do care about it. We learn so much about what animals are doing and eating and their internal anatomy by looking at their waste. So if we were watching animals and we saw that they had gone to the bathroom and we collected it and we tested it and we found that they were eating jellies, we never knew that before. Now we have information about that animal that we know it eats something because we could look for the genetics of a different animal in their waste. So, I mean, poop and sunlight and energy are a lot of context in a lot of biology. Biology is fun because of the gross factor. That's why I love it. Are there any predators for jellies? Lots of things. We talked about turtles, mola molas, the sunfish. A bunch of other fish eat jellies, and interestingly, a lot of jellies eat other jellies. They don't really sting themselves. You don't see a jelly just kind of floating along, going, ow, oh, ow, oh. They don't do that. They have a mucus coat on their body that protects them so they don't sting themselves. But other species of jellies may get eaten by jellies. So nettles will sometimes eat other jellies they run into. That happens. Great question of why are jellies so soft? Their bodies are very squishy. They're invertebrates. They don't have a backbone like we do, backbones. They have a lot of water content to their body is one of the reasons why they're so squishy. I think their bodies are over 90 to 95% water. So the way our bodies are structured and we've adapted, we're about 70-ish%. And we're pretty solid, right? Well, that 25% extra that they get, the lack of bones, the lack of other hard structures, the lack of teeth or cartilage or any of these other rigid structures makes it so that they're very, very squishy. One young learner one time when I was a volunteer here many years ago, and they touched the jelly and they described it to me. They said it felt like a wet gummy bear. You ever have a gummy bear fall out of your mouth and you picked it back up? And you shouldn't do that. The 5-second rule is not real. But if you like took one out of your mouth, you're like, oh, I don't like cinnamon. That's okay. That wet gummy bear feeling, that's jellies. That's what they feel exactly like. And it's kind of described by a lot of people. I asked them to describe, what does it feel like to you? What thing would you associate it with? And there's a lot of squishy things that they kind of think of, like Jello or jelly, which is kind of how they get their name, and gummy bears. So they're squishy like a gummy bear. So if you ever have a chance to touch a sea jelly at a zoo or aquarium, because we know it's safe here, I recommend you do it. If you're finding them out in the ocean, remember, let the ocean animals be the ocean animals. You can leave them alone. If you want to practice touching a jelly, you could get a gummy bear wet, and you could do it that way. All right. Do we have any other fun jelly images? Oh, go back to the crystal jelly real quick while you take a look at one thing. One thing I wanted to share about the crystal jellies that I think is really cool. So Cynthia's going to grab a couple other things. Now, this picture is not the most accurate in terms of color. They're not really reddish pink. They're mostly see-through, which is why they're called crystal jellies. But my favorite thing about the crystal jellies is that they will fluoresce very bright green if you shine a black light on them. In the ring around the bell, the very edge right here, they have this protein in their body that glows a very bright green. Now, a scientist was able to extract that protein and use it in such a way that it granted them the Nobel Prize. So a bunch of scientists said this was such an amazing discovery. They voted on it. They thought it was such an important part of our scientific discovery that person got the Nobel Prize. It's one of the most prestigious prizes in science. So jellies helped advance scientific knowledge. That's really cool. All right, while we answer a couple questions, Cynthia, why don't you throw up some more jelly information for us? Do Greenland sharks eat jellies? That I don't know. This is a comb jelly. I don't know if Greenland sharks eat any kinds of jellies. They do eat a lot of other things. They're not too picky, but jellies are probably not going to give them a whole lot of nutrition. And if you think about how teeth work, if you have big, long teeth for biting and chewing, it's not going to be really worth your time to try and chase down jellies. Now, the turtle might be an exception. It doesn't really have teeth, but it has a very strong beak-like mouth. But turtles will eat fish and other animals, too. So the Greenland shark will probably get a whole lot more nutrition. Remember, this is about 90 to 95% water. The Greenland shark will get a whole lot more nutrition from eating other things. Now, the comb jellies, let's play it one more time, Cynthia. It's a short video, I apologize, but look at the colors that dangle through their body. These are cilia. Remember the... Yes. This is a perfect video of cilia. And the cool thing about comb jellies, this is not fluorescent. So the comb jelly is doing something different. This is like refraction. So imagine a prism, a little prism in your window. Light shines through, you get a rainbow on the other side. This is because of the light that's shining on them, we get this rainbow color. Now, a lot of comb jellies do bioluminesce, but this is not the bioluminescence that we're seeing right now. Mishka's asking, what happens when a jelly bumps into a rock? Oh, not much, because they can't be like, oh, sorry, I got to go this way. Remember, they don't really choose or swim where they go. Funny thing, they can't tell if they're upside down. But remember, they don't have a brain, so they can't really think through that. Now, this is a flower hat jelly. This one does glow special under lights, too. It does do a little bit of fluorescent, I think. So, like, if this one ran into a rock, Mishka, unfortunately, they don't do a whole lot besides keep undulating to try and get away from a surface, but they can't really just swim wherever they want to. So the flower hat jellies, have a whole lot of beautiful coloring on them, and their tentacles kind of wrap up and around the top of their body. So that's one of the cool things about them too. A few of the other jellies we have here, we have egg yolk jellies, we have Japanese sea nettles, we've had purple striped jellies, which purple striped jellies are local to California, Southern California. What are the jellies that we had here? We had a whole summer of jellies a few years ago, so there's been a whole lot of jelly development. And our jelly team, Josh and Val, are great. They are amazing aquarists. They do a lot of great work to make sure that we have really beautiful jellies to show off to our guests. Oh, here we go. The spotted lagoon jellies. These are really pretty. Now, we do have an exhibit of them, too. And they're mixed with another jelly right now. And they're different colors, but have very similar body types. And these are not a jelly that will really sting or hurt you. Like the moon jelly doesn't really hurt people. This one won't really hurt you either. And in some cases, they have algae that live in their body that help do the photosynthesis to get energy. They get some of that from the algae that live in them. And then they don't have to eat as much and the rest of the time. Now, if there's no sunlight, then the jellies might be feeding because they need to get that energy from them. Well, it looks like we've run out of time, and I don't think we have any more questions coming in on Jen's side. So thank you, everybody, so much for participating with us today, asking questions, talking about jellies. I'm sure we all had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun talking about jellies. So we'll see you all for our 2 o'clock program. And which one is that? Fish. We're going to talk about fish. So these are the floaters, the drifters, the plankton. Dana's going to talk about the nectin, specifically just fish. But tune in for our 2 o'clock program with Dana. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time on the Aquarium Online Academy.